which is taking place at County Hall in Glenfield. This meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council website and also available for viewing after the meeting. Item 1, I propose the minutes for the meeting held on the 17th of November 2023 are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is that agreed? Agreed. Item 2, question time. I've received no questions from the public. Item 3, questions under members under Standing Order 7. I've received no questions from members. Item 4, there are no urgent items. So item 5, declaration of interest. Do any members have any declarations you wish to make? Terry.
Usual one, Chair, member of the Lloyds Bank Pension Scheme.
Okay, thank you. Item 6, no petitions have been received. Our first substantive item then is the external audit of the 22-23 Statement of Accounts, Annual Government Statement and Pension Fund Accounts. Simone Hines, Assistant Director, will introduce the report, and we have with us Mark Stocks from Grant Thornton to talk us through their report, which are appended. Welcome, Mark, and thank you for attending this afternoon. Appreciated. Simone, if you would like to go ahead and present the report. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just present the report briefly and then I'm going to hand over to Mark. So this report gives an update on the external audit of the 22-23 financial statements and also presents the auditor's annual report, which also includes the value for money conclusion and also the interim audit findings report, which I'm sure Mark will go into in a lot more detail. So the audit of 22-23 is largely complete with the exception of some property, plant and equipment valuations where we have had some issues with the council's external valuer. So we do still have some issues to resolve and that does mean that we haven't met the statutory deadline for closure and approval of accounts for 22-23, but I think it is just worth mentioning there that the requirement for local government accounts and audit has become more and more complicated in recent years and is now extremely complicated, and that has led to the delay in finalising and signing off accounts, and that's affecting all of local government. And actually, I think Leicestershire is in a comparatively good position actually compared to some other local authorities. So you do have the external audit reports all attached as appendices, and as I said, they are external audit reports. So I'm going to hand over to Mark now to go through those in detail and to answer any questions. Thank you.
So,
Chair, thanks, Simone. So we have a bunch of reports for you today, councillors. So I'll start with the auditor's annual report for 22-23, which starts on page 21 of your agenda. So I will take you to page 23. So this is a comparatively good auditor's annual report. So there's a reality that things are quite difficult at the moment for local government. I think that's widely shared in the press. And if you see, if you look at page 23, we've tried to do a comparator year on year in terms of, what we found last year in comparison to what we found this year. And Leicestershire is pretty stable. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't any pressures on the council. There are clearly pressures on the council. But what that means for us is that, you're managing that as well as you can in the circumstances. So while there's some improvement recommendations there, to be candid, it would be remarkable if there weren't any improvement recommendations given the size of your organisation. So I repeat, this is a strong level of performance and a strong report for the council. So if I just move you on to page 24, for those members who recollect and for those who don't, then the way that we approach this work is that the National Audit Office sets out a code of practice for us, and then we're required to look at the financial sustainability of the council. We're required to look at the governance of the council, and then we have a look at what's called the 3 E's, which is around economy, efficiency, and effectiveness of the council's organisation. So those are the areas that we focus on. Page 24 deals with financial sustainability. So you're in the middle budget setting. You absolutely know that you've got significant financial pressures. So I'm not here saying that you haven't got significant financial pressures. My message to you is that, given those pressures, that I think you're managing them rather well. Now that doesn't mean that you can stop. I think that unless the government does something significantly different, you're always going to feel that financial pressure. There are just a couple of areas to flag. One's around the DSG deficit, sorry, the dedicated schools grant deficit, that continues to grow. You're not dissimilar to other councils in that, there's quite a lot of counties and metropolitan authorities who are feeling the pressure in terms of the dedicated schools grant. We can see that you're doing as much as you can. You're sort of working hard with government to try and sort of put in different arrangements, but that has to work. That level of deficit is growing, and and at the moment that effectively sits off your balance sheet because the government's put in a statutory override. Now, what the government will do on that, I don't know. It needs to find a resolution with councils in terms of how to take that forward. But that is an area of continued focus. The other areas around sort of special educational need, that's driving a lot of costs across the country, and again, that's an area for you to continue to focus on. But I repeat, comparatively, I think you are doing well in terms of your financial sustainability. So moving on to page 25, we look quite in detail at governance. We look at sort of the governance framework in particular, so how the covenant models working, sort of how the those structures and audit committees and so on work together to keep the council safe, and whether there's sort of sufficient reporting in terms of risk management, and also an appropriate tone from the top, in terms of the messages that are giving, and I suppose an acknowledgement from members as well as officers about the risks that are facing the council. So we do quite a lot of work in terms of governance. And again, I'm pleased to report there's nothing significant that I need to bring to your attention. And I suppose just to give you some surety, we are flagging this as a significant weakness at many councils, where we're either unhappy with member behaviour or we're unhappy with what officers are doing in terms of managing the council. So it's not that you're not being assessed against a high standard, it's that you've passed that high standard, and I don't have any particular concerns either in terms of how you're behaving or in terms of how officers are behaving. I think the structures are working reasonably well at Leicestershire. Final area just to talk through, and then I'll pass over to you for questions, is just on page 26 and 27. So as I said earlier, we look at what's called economy, efficiency and effectiveness. That's sort of an overview in terms of your performance and whether there are any particular concerns that we have in terms of any areas of your performance. So we can see that you do have a proper performance monitoring system in place. We think that that's a reasonably effective service. That is showing you a deterioration in some services. Now, when you kind of compare that to your core spending power, an area that you raised with me last year, then your services are comparatively performing well. But you can see the financial pressure on the council because those performance indicators are actually deteriorating. So there's something for you to think about in terms of, well, how do you maintain those services in what's a difficult financial position for the authority. We did note sort of towards the bottom of page 26 that we saw sort of an increase in complaints, particularly around children's social care. Now that can mean many things, but we do tend to flag this because it can be an indication of services either worsening or not performing to the standard that you would expect. So we have flagged that. And then just moving finally on to page 27, we just flag a few areas, just two I'd kind of bring to your attention. One, when we've looked at procurement, we've seen a significant increase in the number of contract waivers that are coming through the council. That's not good practice. That's something that you need to respond to in terms of making sure those contracts are properly monitored and then properly let when they come forward. And then secondly, when we've looked at the governance arrangements around particularly the Freeport and around the development company, they're not quite where they need to be. They need to be strengthened, and so we've made recommendations on those within the report. Management of officers have accepted that and are working on it. Now, in the nature of audit, you hear all the criticisms and none of the good. So, as I said, I think this is a comparatively good performance by the council. We have flagged some improvement recommendations. I think of my authorities, you're the only council where I'm not flagging some red risk key recommendations. So I do think this is a comparatively good report. There are two other reports, Chair, but I'm going to stop here and hand back to you for questions, and then I will go on to the next report.
Thank you, Mark. Have we got any questions or queries? Please, Bill.
Thank you. Yes. Can you home in on the net zero reports on that? It appears twice in your reports. We heard on Wednesday we're not hitting the targets for net zero. They've been extended by another 5 years, which caused me concern. I don't know what Lords think about that, but we are nowhere near where we should be with net zero. The date's been put out from 2030 to 2035, 2045, 2040 to 2045. The leader did say we'll meet the targets by 2050, the national target, but we were led to believe we were one in front of other authorities with our net zero, and I wonder what this committee would like to comment on that.
I'll come in first, and then I'll hand over to officers who may be able to provide more light on this than I can. So when we looked at it, I think the answer was the same. So we thought the council was on track. Now I think things appear to have gone off since we looked at this a couple of months ago, because obviously there's a bit of a time lag in terms of getting reports to you. I think these are choices for the council. It's a difficult financial position for the council, and there's going to be a trade-off between providing services and delivering everything that you want to. So I think it's a matter of, for members with the leader and cabinet and officers to determine, well, what are your strategic priorities within the financial envelope that you have? And I imagine that's why it's gone off target, Councillor.
Okay, so any other, Declan?
Just to add to that, the process at the moment it was raised at committee, and it'll come to county council for sort of debate and sort of approval whether we do change those targets. But just to, I suppose, square the circle, really good progress has been made, but what we're trying to do is sort of looking ahead. It becomes increasingly difficult and expensive as you continue to decarbonise. And when you look at the sort of the national landscape, there seems to be less appetite for providing that sort of, I suppose, gap funding, as it were, between the kind of current approaches and the sort of carbon-free approaches. And also then when you look locally, our room to sort of supplement outside of our statutory sort of mandatory services just becoming squeeze. So it's really just trying to get ahead of that position, so we're kind of giving, I suppose, the council gets sort of a true view of where we think we are as an organisation. But don't get me wrong, good progress is still being made. We'll still continue to make progress. It just may be slightly later, and it's just reinforcing the fact that we are very dependent on government, either legislation or grant funding, to help us on the way.
Thank you. Terry.
I suppose really it's just the language in some ways on page 24. So we're talking about the off-balance sheet liability we have as a government instruction, which I think concerns us most. But then you're actually saying that in some ways it's our responsibility to do something about it. Now, the government have recognised it's impossible for us to do something about it, which is why they've instructed us to run it off balance sheet. So it seems a strange comment in there to say the government have told you you can never do anything about it because they won't give us the extra money we need. We can do the best we can, and we are doing the best we can. And you note that we're in line with all other councils in this. So surely the comment should read, this will only be able to be corrected should central government provide more money in this area. So you're putting the blame on us and the responsibility on us, where surely the responsibility should be on central government. And therefore, all auditors of particularly upper tier authorities and those that run school services shall be jumping up and down and banging on the government's door to say, you are causing a problem for councils unless you correct this aspect. And there doesn't seem to be enough from your part of the world to actually support this area. It's just a note saying, well, we hope you do something to stop it going to the projected 90 million. Well, how?
An interesting question, Councillor. So, unfortunately, that's not the way the legislation or the accounts work. So, effectively, you've been given an amount of money by the government for schools, and in way the legislation works, then it's the council that's overspent. So you've overspent that grant funding. Now, what the government's done as a temporary measure has said councils, including yourself, can hold that effectively off balance sheet. It's actually on balance sheet, but it's sort of it's in a pot that doesn't impact on your overall reserves. Now, the government's perfectly entitled to do one of two things. It can withdraw that statutory recommendation, at which point all those liabilities come back onto your balance sheet, and then you have a £90 million impact on your overall reserves, or it can find you £90 million in additional funding. Now, as your auditor, I have no view or no crystal ball that will tell me which way the government's going to go. So my responsibility is to tell you you have a £90 million liability coming up, and if you can't negotiate that with the government, then you need to find another way to fund it.
Is that strictly true? Because you also comment on the financial viability of the organisation. Now, the financial viability of the organisation is dictated and determined in some ways by government policy and the fact that they've actually given an instruction. So why would you think they've given this instruction to effectively run it off balance sheet if they felt councils were able to accommodate it? They clearly recognise that councils aren't able to accommodate it, which is why they're given the instruction to keep it off balance sheet. So surely the recommendation should be to central government to sort this out. Otherwise, you're impairing the financial viability of councils.
I don't have the power to make that recommendation to the government, councillor. So I won't make that recommendation.
It's a shame we don't, Mark. It's a shame we don't. He would. No, I understand. So, Mr. Bill.
Chair, I'd like to back up what Terry said there, that if we're responsible for schools in any way, and the schools haven't got enough money, and the directly funded schools do not have enough money, then what are we supposed to do about it? If we haven't got the power to do anything about it, it's something that really ought to be followed through by somebody somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're not alone in having this liability on a balance sheet, which is off balance sheet. Officers can correct me, but I don't think it's unique to us.
Now, there's a lot of kind of councils in this position, and there's almost different phases. So you've got a handful of councils in what they call safety valve, who are on it's sort of under extreme pressure. We're in sort of the next level down with quite a lot of councils, about 50 or plus on in terms of and it's called delivering best value for SEND. And through that, we do get the opportunity to engage with the Department for Education, submit to them our plans, they get to critique it. So there is that dialogue going back and forth. And obviously part of that, we do kind of stress that we don't think it's an achievable kind of proposition on a local level, and they need to do something either with funding or regulations. So there is that ongoing dialogue. It's just very hard to influence at the moment. But I think there's so many authorities in that position. Government is having to listen. It's just they don't have the money to face up to it quite yet.
Thanks, Mr. Bill. So, any other questions? So, Mark, oh, hang on, Neil.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the presentation of the report. Page 27, the section regarding procurement under improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness. And I note a significant increase in contract exceptions and extensions year on year. There are processes in place to address that. Having regard to another report we have on this agenda, I think it's agenda item 10, about the update and recommendations in respect to the contract procedure rules update. Do you have any comment about that being part of the process to address those issues that are raised in this paragraph?
I think the new rules will help, councillor. I think there's, but it's, I suppose my comment would be, whenever you introduce rules, this is more around then implementing those rules, monitoring those rules, and getting a cultural reset. So because you have to make sure that those rules actually drive that reduction in contract waivers. So, but obviously, changes that you make will support that.
Okay, so I don't have any further questions, Mark, if you want to carry on then.
Thank you, Councillor. So the second report we have on starts at page 85 of your pack. So we're well on with the accounts audit for 22-23. I had hoped to complete the audit by this time, but had as officers, and officers have continued to work well with us. The delay really is around the audit of property, plant and equipment, where we've struggled to get the data that we need from the council's external valuers. So that process is still ongoing. We received more information yesterday, and we're continuing to work closely with officers. Now I think both my team and the officer team, are clear that we need to get that part of the audit done, and then once that's completed, then I think we should be able to report back to you at least by the end of March in terms of the opinion. But officers do need your support in terms of resolving that. So if I just take you to page 85, that just sort of outlines some of the key areas of findings this year, and most of them are around either pensions or around property valuation. Now, subject just to finalising the accounts and that work on property, I would intend to issue an unmodified opinion. So that's the form of opinion that you want. That's me saying that the accounts present a true and fair view. So just picking out some of the key areas, there will be an adjustment around the net pension liability within the accounts. So pensions is a really complex estimate, and this year, because of a change in discount rate, then a lot of pension funds move to surplus, and but when you do that, you have to consider sort of unfunded pensions, and so there was an error of around £14 million there. Now the council hasn't lost any money; it's just a piece of pension fund accounting, but we will make that adjustment to the accounts. And then there's a couple of changes, one around assets under construction, just making sure that figure's properly brought to account, and that assets that are in use are brought into the right area of the accounts. And then there's others around historic cost and changes in value. So there's a few areas just to kind of work through in terms of the financial statements, but fundamentally, these are areas that don't impact on the council's usable reserves. So there's nothing that I'm aware of that will impact on the reports that officers have been bringing to you in terms of the budget going forward. Just a couple more pages, Chair, because I'm aware this is a long document, so I'll just give you some highlights. So on page 89, it just sets out the work that's left to be done. So as I said, we would hope to complete that by the end of March. And then on page 91, the way we operate the audit is we work around significant risks. So those are the areas where we think there's I suppose the chance of some of the financial statements being incorrect. So one of the areas we look at in quite a lot of detail is around what auditing standards called management override of control, and that's the ability through journals or through accounting estimates or through accounting policies to misstate the accounts. I'm pleased to report there's no evidence of that. We have done some work around the general ledger coding structure again this year, because that is rather complex, and we do think that needs to be strengthened. And there's some work I think to strengthen sort of general authorization. But there's nothing that I need to report back in terms of concerns in terms of officers' production of the accounts. Turning on to page 993, there's rather a lot there in terms of property. valuation. I think that's probably the story of the audit this year, both in terms of the performance of your external valuers, but then how it's been brought to account. So there's some work, I think, for both ourselves and officers to do going into 23-24 to make sure that work is done properly and we're happy with it, so that it doesn't delay the accounts again for when we do the 23-24 accounts. And then finally on page 95, we just talk through more detail in terms of pension accounting and the changes that we've made. I'm going to stop there, Chair. There's a lot of detail in the report. I'm more than happy to take any questions in terms of the work that we've done. As I said, we're substantially complete other than for property valuation, and it would hope to conclude the audit by the 31st of March. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So has anybody got any further questions they'd like to ask before Mark carries on? Mr. Bolter.
Yes, I'm still concerned about net zero, Chair, because it seems strange to me that the report we had on Wednesday was written some time ago. But the report you all just saw 2 months ago didn't pick that up. So I'd have thought the department knew they weren't going to hit the targets. That should have been fed through to the auditors, surely, in part of this report. Not, one auditor's report says we're all right. In actual fact, we're not. I'd have thought somewhere there should be some correlation between the two, saying we're missing the target. Because if you read this, it sounds as though we're on target, but in actual fact, we're not. So I don't know how that can appear in the minutes as being concern.
Well, Declan, I think you alluded to that earlier on. Perhaps you just reiterate what you were saying before.
I think that maybe the key bit is we're talking about sort of a target, 2030 was the first one, so quite a few years in the future. So it's not as simple as some targets where you get your KPI and it's a straight comparison. It's a bit of an assessment of where we're going to get to. So because the progress has slowed a bit, and that performance report did only go to the Scrutiny Commission this week, that was the first time where they sort of reviewed that sort of progress, made that assessment, and sort of took the view that it's not going to be possible in the resources we've got. So that was really the first time that it could have fed in. Whereas in fairness, I suppose that the Grant Thornton report isn't judging our ability to hit net zero. It's more about sort of the decision-making process and the financial arrangements that we've got in place, as opposed to that as a specific policy objective.
Thank you. So, any other questions? No. Okay. So, Mark, if you just want to.
Thanks, Chair. So the last part of the audit that we have to undertake is the audit of the pension fund. So what you have in front of you on page 134 is the final plan for the pension fund. So you recall that we brought that to you quite a while ago. So I'm not going to. So this is just as finalising and updated. So I'm not going to talk through it in any detail, Chair. Just in terms of an update on where we are with the pension fund audit, that is substantially completed. So I was reviewing the file yesterday. So again, I would hope to conclude that audit and bring it back to members by the 31st of March. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So, any other questions or queries? No? So, Mark, have you concluded now? Is that all you want to say?
Thank you. Fair enough from you, Chair. So yes, that's everything.
Never heard enough from the auditors. Right, so if we have no other questions or comments or queries, thank you, Mark, for coming along and going through it. It's certainly a substantial report, and overall, it's very rare for things to be perfect. We seem as though we're in a fairly sound position, as many and better than most. So we asked to note the report and consider the issues raised in the external auditor's audit finding report. Our comments will be captured in the minutes in the usual way. Is that agreed? Yeah, so that's unanimous. Thanks. So next item on the agenda is item 8, which is the SIPSA Financial Management Code for 22-23. Simone, you're going to present this report. Please, could you go ahead then?
Thank you, Chair. So the Financial Management Code was established by CITFA a few years ago, and it really helps local authorities to establish whether their financial management arrangements represent good practice, and also whether they demonstrate financial sustainability and where any improvements might be. And of course, that is particularly relevant at the moment, given the local government landscape. So the code sets out 7 standards that local authorities can then assess themselves against, and you can see in Appendix A what those standards are, and we've then completed a self-assessment of the authority's sort of financial management arrangements against those standards, and identified some areas of improvement. Although it is really good to note that self-assessment does show that we are compliant across all those 7 standards, and there's just 3 areas of potential of minor improvement, which I'll just highlight very briefly. So the first one is around options appraisal methodology, and although we have got a really sort of solid corporate methodology in place to assess business cases, we are suggesting that we could adopt some more consistent approach to post-implementation reviews of business cases. Then in terms of monitoring the balance sheet, we are going to look at how we can do that slightly more regularly, and looking at monitoring our balance sheet codes perhaps on a quarterly basis. And then the last one is part of the multi-year medium-term financial planning process, and looking at the implication, or those longer-term implications of infrastructure projects that clearly go well beyond the 4 years of our MTFS, and how we can ensure that we are capturing the risks of any forward funding that the council might need to be taking on. So I'll leave it there. You have got the appendix, which, as I said, sets out all of those standards. We've got a commentary setting out how we think we meet those standards and some evidence for each one. And then there's just a couple of areas of minor improvement, as I've mentioned, but really happy to take any questions on any of those.
Thank you, Simone. So, members, have you got any queries or questions you'd like to raise on this report? Derek?
I'll resist when I see the word CITFA. I suppose my question would be, as I read this in detail, but it always strikes me when it comes back to the previous report with the audits, where we have to have a specialist audit regime. We have timescales which are universal across the country, which cause problems getting auditors, etc. So I do actually believe that if councils were given the ability to actually run their accounts as if we were an ordinary commercial trading company, which is effectively what we are, that this would actually significantly reduce pressures of work, and that on this council could mean we could have different end year dates and different audit times. And would that greatly enhance the ability? So is CITFA a hindrance to financial transparency and the good running and simple running of a council? And do we believe that our residents, who after all pay for us in large extent, have the ability to understand an opaque system which is CITFA against what they would normally look at for any other business?
I'll attempt to answer that. Thank you, Chair. Well, I guess CITFA are the professional accounting body for the public sector, and I think it is important that there is a sort of an objective body that sets those standards for local authorities to follow, and that there's consistent standards for all local authorities to follow. So no, I think CITFA are an important professional body that do set those standards, and I'm sure Mark might want to comment on that, and in terms of the relationship that the external auditor has with CITFA as well. And I think in the absence of that regime, I think there would be even more difficulties in terms of financial sustainability and monitoring financial management as well.
So, Mark, would you like to add your comments to that?
Some good questions here today, Chair. So you actually have to go higher, interestingly, than CITFA. So basically, the government has decided that local government has to use what's called IFRS, which is International Financial Reporting Standards. And that's mandated by the Treasury, and basically an organisation called FRAB sort of polices the as you know, councillor, if you're an accountant, they police. Oh right, okay. So if you're okay, right. So they police so how CITFA sort of implement IFRS. So now I think we've all, well, I certainly have. I've had conversations with FRAB and department around changing the CITFA code, and they are listening in terms of well, how can the code be changed to make the accounts, one, simpler, but two, more accessible to those who actually use it, like yourself, and so there are changes, but the core problem is this is a personal view, is that IFRS accounting is hard to implement in local government, and so that causes a great deal of complexity, I think, for officers in terms of pulling the accounts together, because they have to move from a cash reporting basis, which is the one you get in terms of your in-year reporting, to an accounting basis, and it's ever so complex. It really is complex. So so I have a great deal of sympathy. I continue to have these conversations around, well, can we change the accounting code, and so how do we get something that's actually useful to the public and members, and that conversation's ongoing.
Thank you, Mark. I think it's a very diplomatic way to phrase it all. So, have we got any other questions or queries? No. Right, so thank you, Simone. We are asked to note the report and consider the issues raised. We're asked to note this report, and anything that's been raised will be noted in the minutes. Is everybody happy to agree that? Thank you. So the next report is I believe it's an annual report on the Regulatory of Investment Powers Act 2000 and Investigatory Powers Act 2016. Lauren Haslam, Director of Law and Governance, is here to introduce the report with the support of Gary Connors, Head of Regulatory Services. So over to you then, Lauren.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. I'm pleased to introduce this report on the operation of RIPA. As you say, it's an annual report. It's a highly technical and specialist area, slightly niche really in many ways. The other important factor to note is it's highly regulated. It's subject to oversight by the judiciary, the Office of Communications Data, and the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office. Is not referred to in the report, but just by way of background, we were subject to an inspection by the Commissioner's Office back in the middle of 2022. And I think we brought a report to this committee probably last year, this time, on the outcome of that. And just to remind members, we've got a very positive feedback from the Sir Brian Leveson, who's the Investigatory Powers Commissioner, who identified no issues in regard to how we operate the Investigatory Powers Act. It's a really important tool in our enforcement armoury, and although we obviously were very pleased with the outcome of the inspection, we're not at all complacent in relation to this, and take great care to make sure that we exercise our powers, because they are quite significant, in a responsible way that's compliant at all times with the relevant legislation. I'm going to hand over to Gary, if that's okay, Chair, because the sort of day-to-day operation of the Act is largely in his area of the business, and I think he'll be able to take you through where we are with the legislation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The report essentially deals with the County Council's use of covert surveillance and how such activities are regulated. Paragraph 2 and 3 confirm that this committee should review the policy once a year, and on this occasion there's no proposed changes to the policy and it remains fit for purpose. Therefore, there's no requirement for further review by Cabinet. Paragraph 5 provides an outline of what is meant by covert surveillance in a local authority setting, and essentially there are three types. The first one is directed surveillance, which is essentially recording, and that can be used in recording equipment or simply observation of individuals. Covert human intelligence source is rather a mouthful, but in a local authority context with trading standards, that's covert test purchasing in relation to criminal offences. And the third area is communications data. A local authority is not lawfully permitted to undertake any form of intrusive surveillance, So that's, for example, surveillance in residential premises, or to intercept communications data, or in fact to see the content of communications data covertly. The County Council will undertake these activities if it is necessary, proportionate, and there is no other less intrusive means in which to obtain the evidence of that criminal activity. Paragraphs 7 and 8 explains that there are stringent internal and external judicial authorisation processes to enable the County Council to undertake these activities. That includes authorising officers internally and then followed on in relation to directed surveillance and covert human intelligence sources. That means an officer attending the Magistrates' Court, making an extensive application which is always scrutinised by the court. Paragraph 9 to 15 explains the different arrangements for communications data because it is of a technical nature and involves contacting communications service providers, and that's actually facilitated through the National Anti-Fraud Network, which is actually hosted by Gateshead Council. Paragraph 16 is the indication of activities, covert surveillance of activities we've undertaken in the last 12 months. They are all, on this occasion, trading standards cases, all criminal investigations, and they essentially relate to fraudulent trading, the supply of illicit and counterfeit unsafe products, and clearly the capture of covert test purchasing exercises. Paragraph 18, the County Council intranet, that's an important part of raising awareness around RIPA. We're always satisfied that we have the appropriate skills and expertise within the Trading Standards Service, for example, to consider authorisations. But the essential part to this is to make sure that other officers that would not normally be considering a form of covert surveillance, that they are made aware of RIPA and understand that they can only access that facility through this authorisation system. So the internal intranet is designed to provide that advice and awareness. And the recommendations are set out in paragraph 19. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Has anybody got Terry?
Thanks, Gary, and hopefully you recognise just how much we value the work you and your team do, which I think has been excellent, certainly in the time I've been a councillor here. I've just noted the contents, paragraph 17. So I suppose it's sort of a double question that every time we've applied for one, it's been granted by the court. Are there any occasions when we've wanted to do surveillance but didn't feel we would meet the benchmark to put in a court application? And if so, do you believe that's been detrimental to what we should have been able to do as a council?
Internally, we have considered applications or indications that they want to put an application through, and it's not gone past the first base in terms of authorisation. By the time we get to the Magistrates' Court, we've kind of gone through that process, but I'll give you an example of where there was an amendment to an authorisation. So this was an application to carry out some surveillance with a view to entering a premises, and it was around the location of the camera and something called collateral intrusion, which is the intrusion of others not targeted or linked. So that could be the general public, for example. So I think the answer I would give you is that the magistrates are very alive to it, and they will suggest amendments to those. So we've had a couple of authorisations where perhaps the surveillance exercise, in terms of how it's conducted, has been restricted down due to the concerns around collateral intrusion. But generally, the way the law works in terms of directed surveillance, that it's a serious crime threshold, that which would carry a sentence of 6 months or more. So it's a fairly high bar for a local authority. So we're fairly clear before we go there that we've got a relatively good chance. That said, magistrates, albeit lay magistrates, we tend to be before, and a legal advisor, they do scrutinise it quite intensively. And I think a lot of that is the fact that we are a local authority. So when RIPA first came into play, you may remember headlines in the Daily Mail around the Snoopers Charter and filming people so that they're not, they're trying to access catchment areas for schools. And we had all that kind of bad press. Clearly, that's not the case in this authority and never has been. But we're probably open to more scrutiny than the police. And that's why there's that additional layer of the Magistrates' Court.
Yeah, thank you.
You're quite right, this Gary said it's a high bar. Are there occasions when you think that bar's been too high and has stopped us actually doing an effective job?
No, I think we have the balance right. There has been elements of, shall we say, tension in relation to wanting to get the operation done efficiently. So if it's a directed surveillance activity and we are being restricted down too far, then there's a resource implication with that. And that can be frustrating because we need to just get on and do it within the financial constraints. The type of activity that we're undertaking at the minute, and you'll see from those, the number of authorisations that we've gone through this year, they are low. And that's reflective really of what resources are available, because covert surveillance is an expensive method, albeit very useful when there's no other less intrusive means to get the evidence.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Has anybody else got any further questions? Neil.
Thank you, Gary, for the report. In respect of the 10 authorities that were granted to the council, did those 10 actually eventually lead to prosecutions? And of those that did lead to prosecutions, how many were successful prosecutions?
All of them did. One exception where we decided to tackle the issue by the way of a closure order with the police, that was in relation to an illicit tobacco supply area, and there were public interest issues in terms of how we progress that, because there were links to modern slavery and how we actually deal with those particular defendants. All the rest have resulted in prosecutions, notably on the communications data requests. They are fairly critical because very often we're asking for that information. So, for example, a subscriber information on a mobile phone. That is the starting point in a doorstep crime scenario. So where a vulnerable elderly person's been scammed at the door, obtaining that mobile number, that contact number of who that subscriber is the link to start that investigation. So in answer to your question, yes, most of them would finish in the Magistrates' Court. And the surveillance material, in a trading standards perspective, it tends to be the key evidence in the case. So if it's a covert test purchase of counterfeit products or illicit tobacco products, that will be produced as the main piece of evidence to show that that trader supplied to that individual.
Mr. Grimes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, when you were talking before about Snoopers Charter and the introduction of RIPA, when RIPA came in, I was working in the Inland Revenue, and we had to effectively introduce that into our system, and I was responsible for authorising the surveillance within the revenue. I was exceptionally pleased to hear the work, and of course moved on many years from that, and I was very pleased to hear about the processes you've got in place for your training your people around that. I certainly found, and we found within the revenue, that people who, say, tax inspectors who had just been doing observations prior to RIPA were very were very twitchy about having to present a case to a particular individual, i.e. myself, that things could, to actually undertake the surveillance. And there was quite a lot of tension around that, and I was very pleased to hear about how the system is now working. It's just really a clarification around that your systems are in place, and other questions have really clarified that. That where we've got to at the moment is that everybody understands the thresholds, and you have good debates around, is this case suitable, is it not suitable, etc., etc. And I think you've given us the assurance around that, and I just wondered if you've got any views on that type of thing at all.
I think Leicestershire have always been fairly proactive in utilising the legislation. It's there for a legitimate use. I think there's a degree of nervousness perhaps with other local authorities because they know that they have to face a magistrates court and make sure, belt and braces are applied and they understand the law and they understand what's behind it in terms of the Human Rights Act. So we do tend to lead on it regionally. So we sometimes get queries from other local authorities on how to tackle the issue. And I'm pleased to say that as a county council, there is an awareness, because very often where it goes wrong, I think to what you're alluding to within HMRC and other authorities, where there's less exposure to it on a regular basis, then there is always that risk that unauthorised surveillance will be undertaken, which would be a very serious issue from a reputational point of view with the local authority. So there's a lot of work behind the scenes corporately. But the last two inspections, we've always tended to have a fairly positive response from the inspectorate. So that's good. But I think it is appropriate that we use it in appropriate cases. And the elderly, vulnerable victim, the doorstep crime, that's it's a no-brainer really, in terms of that's our only other method to be able to protect that individual and hopefully get some money back for the victim.
Thank you, Gary. So are there no other questions? So the committee is asked to, firstly, to note the use of the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000, RIPA, and the Investigative Powers Act 2016, IPA, for the period of 1st of January to the 31st of December 2023. So can we take that as noted? Yeah. Secondly, to review the Council's covert surveillance and the acquisition of communication data policy statement, which is unchanged since approved by Cabinet in March 2021, and confirm that it remains fit for purpose. Is that agreed? Agreed. Finally, to agree to continue to receive an annual report on the use of RIPA and the IPA powers. Is that agreed? Yeah. Okay, so the next item we've got is the contract procedure rules update, which is item 10, and we have with us Kay Springthorpe, Procurement and Commissioning Support Manager, who will present this item. So over to you, Kay. Your report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. I'm here today, obviously, to present the report on the contract procedure rules. There are two elements to this report. So the first is the application of the contract procedure rules, which is from the period 1st of July 2022 through to the 30th of September 2023. And the second element of this report is the proposed amendments to the contract procedure rules. In terms of the application of the rules from the period of 1st July 2022 to 30th September 2023, you will have heard earlier in the audit report that there were an increased number of exceptions. So there were 141 approved exceptions under Rule 6 of our contract procedure rules. This is an increase in comparison to previous years, even though the reporting period, you'll notice, is longer that I'm bringing to you today. 8 of those were above threshold for the public contract regulations, and details of those are provided in Appendix A. All of the 8, in fact all of the 141, were improved in the appropriate manner in line with our contract procedure rules, 5 of which went to Cabinet for approval. The increase in under threshold exceptions has been attributed to tighter controls that we've been implementing, and additional time therefore for departments to get those tenders done and compliant. During that same period, there were 38 extensions or variations to contracts. 14 of those were above threshold contracts, 11 of which were extensions, 2 of which were modifications, again, all of which are detailed in Appendix A of the report. The second element of the report covers the proposed revisions to the contract procedure rules. So they are detailed in Appendix B, but essentially we've amended the rules to give greater clarity on the application of extensions, of modifications and variations and exceptions, and to tighten the approval controls in line with some of the recommendations found in the audit report. We're going to manage those via a procurement board that we're implementing as part of our financial controls, and we'll work to reduce those number of exceptions, strengthening pipelines across the council so that we've got greater visibility on upcoming activity. In addition, we've made it clearer within the rules the scheme of delegation for signing contracts. So we've added in a table on that, and we've added in the new legislative requirements under the new provider selection regime. The regime was introduced by regulations made under the Care Act of 2022 and came into force on the 1st of January this year. So subject to your approval, this will be presented to County Council on the 21st of February, I believe. And as part of the report, I am proposing amendments to the timescales of reporting to match the financial year. Therefore, the report will come to you in May of this year. So, and then it will continue to be May onwards. And I feel that given the situation that we're in and the responses from the audit, that by coming to you in May, you'll be able to see how those additional controls have impacted, because we're coming to you in a much quicker time frame than what we normally would. So that's everything. Thank you, Chair. If anybody's got any questions.
Hey, thank you very much. Hey, thank you. So have we got any questions, Mr. Campion?
Thank you, Chair. I think Mark mentioned earlier on actually the concerns with the number of extensions that we've had. Do you feel that, obviously you're putting tighter controls, you're saying that's why, do you feel that once departments get used to those tighter controls, you're going to naturally see a decline in the numbers?
Yes, that's correct. I think we're raising awareness, we're driving a different culture that Mark talked about. So yeah, we're seeing that high level now, but I expect to see it reduce dramatically.
Terry.
Thanks, Chair. I did ask earlier, but I'll ask here. So on the chart in Appendix A, there were, as you say, items that were agreed by Cabinet, and there's a link given to the Cabinet meeting at which the approval was given. But I had a quick look afterwards because I usually use mod.gov because you can actually search reports, but I went into Teams and there's still no link from that. You can't just click on it to get there. So could there be a link rather than having to enter in the whole of the thing to look it up, which would be useful? And secondly, I think on 3 or 4 of them, we say Cabinet approval given, exception to allow time for procurement of a new framework. So the question is, what is the procedure in place for the timescale of those new frameworks to be done, and who actually checks those new frameworks being put in place? And is all that information contained in the report which will Cabinet have received, which I freely admit I haven't seen, so it could all be there. But I just wonder what the procedure is where we put to allow a new framework. So, 10 years, 3 months. I would have thought it would have said there, new framework to be in place in 3 months and has been done, or something like that, but there's nothing there.
No, that's a good question. So I included the links. Essentially, every exception or modification or variation that is completed, there's a form that people have to fill in order to get that approved. And that form details what the mitigating actions are. So when it will be procured, how it will be procured, and then it's allocated to someone in my team who then drives that and makes sure that that happens. They can't actually spend any money with a provider without that framework being in place. So everything's blocked for them up until the point. So say, for example, we say the framework will be in place by April 2024. Up until April 2024, they can raise orders, they can do things under the exception. Once that date hits, they can't do anything if the framework isn't in place. So we've got a number of measures someone is allocated from my team to monitor and measure and make sure it's happening. And then we've got that additional control to say you can't actually do anything until it's in place. I think all of these examples here, those procurements have been completed. So I note for further reports, I'll add additional detail in to provide a better link and to tell you exactly where that is now in comparison to what that report said.
Terry. Thank you for that, and I'd appreciate address the link you can click on. But on that basis, then presumably on this basis, this is something that has to go to cabinet level. So once the framework has been put in place, presumably a report goes back to cabinet to tell them the framework's been put in place, or do cabinet give delegated authority and never see it again? Because it just strikes me as a gap there in the process. If cabinet say, we're giving you authority to do this, but like nobody from an elected member point of view ever knows where it's been completed.
No, that's correct. Cabinet do give delegated authority for that to be seen out, but we could look at considering amending that to bring something back.
Just on that point, I suppose it's the negative almost, because any of these exceptions that have come past, it's always less than a year. So if you don't have it done in time, you end up having to do another exception, and then it goes back to cabinet. So that's your safeguard at the back.
There are no other questions. First, we were asked to note the contents of the report, and second, we were asked to recommend to the County Council that the proposed amendments to the contract procedure rules detailed in Appendix B approved. I'm happy to move this recommendation. Do I have a seconder?
Second.
Yeah.
Happy second, Chair.
Okay, everybody in agreement? Yeah, that's fine. So we're on to item number 11, the risk management update. Thank you, Kay. Thank you. Neil Jones, Head of Internal Audit, will present this item and provide the requested presentation on property and occupants risk management. So, Neil, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Joe's going to run the slides in a moment for me. Thank you. So it was back in September committee when part of the risk management update, I gave a little update on the reinforced concrete issue that was around at the time and how the County Council had dealt with it and how forward plans on that. And it was just thought a generally good idea to bring back to the committee the work of the group, of the property and occupant risk management group. I've had a look back in time, and I did report this some years back, but obviously there's been a significant change in the membership. So I'm going to start off with the first. Apologies, there's only 4 slides. They're a bit busy. I didn't have a chance to slim them down. But I'll start off with the first slide, please, Joe. And just a bit of history, really, in terms of how the group started. Immediately post Grenfell, we set up a corporate group, or re-established a corporate group, basically, which was then led by Chris Tambini, Director of Finance. And that was just to really provide assurances to members and other stakeholders about the County Council's position, and also looking ahead, expecting that there's going to be lots of inspection and regulation from the government due to Grenfell. So obviously a lot of early work was around the fire risk, and especially around maintaining schools and looking at construction materials and installation methods, and undertaking then more detailed risk assessments. If we remember accommodation sites when we had at Mapplewell and things like that. So there were a range of cabinet reports around a sprinkler policy, and how that was supported with quite forward looking on that. And then we also extended that out to looking at our fire risk in procured buildings where we've got vulnerable adults, etc. And then also to academies. And there were questions asked about why we did that, but this is around retaining our responsibility around people safety. Just before Grenfell, there was, and around Grenfell time, there was obviously the terrorist atrocities, a number of terrorist atrocities. So the terms of reference for the group was widened out, not just for property risk, but also people risk, people and security risk. So specifically around County Hall, and that was the start really of the build up to all of the security measures we've got around County Hall now. So that was a bit of history. Next slide, please, Joe. So how are we set up? You'll see on today's paper, we've got the terms of reference, and okay, we review those annually. I now chair the group, and I think that's linked into my corporate risk management framework responsibilities. We do have lots of links across to resilience planning group, and then the two groups I've mentioned there are the government's terrorism groups, Prevent and Protect. Protect is still underway in terms of how we're going to manage that sort of thing. I'll talk about that on the last slide. We also invite our broker, the insurers, to the meetings, and the fire service are invited, but they don't often come, but they get the minutes. We've got sort of two routes through the group. You've got the compliance people who work internally, so you've got our operational property services, and strategic property services in terms of planning buildings, etc., legal, health, safety and welfare and resilience. They're all, we have to ensure there's compliance to what they need. Then we've got others who act as conduits into the departments. So they bring their risk management issues into that. We meet quarterly. I've put there vigorous debate is very good. It's a very close-knit group that challenges each other in terms of how these risks are being managed. And then we're reporting to Declan twice a year, chief officers as part of this process, and then corporate governance committee. So last year, what did we do? Ongoing work around fire safety. This is pretty routine in a way. The fire service, we sort of push the ante on that again through our property operational property services. So we do undertake a lot of inspections by qualified inspectors. We actually, I think we actually transferred a guy across from the fire service to start doing those, and training also our contract monitoring officers who go to third party. And then also we've had a range of audits of maintained schools and county hall. They've been very positive. The occupant safety, which continues, we review terrorism threat, and we look at that in terms of what continuous improvements we're making. I'll come on to that again on the final slide. Obviously, County Hall is a different place to when this was first originally come, so there's lots of gaps in space and people not there, so we've got to be mindful of who's in the building and how they're getting into the building. We've also obviously got tenants, a range of tenants in the building now, and so we've had to have quite a rigorous training courses for those to abide by the same routines that County Hall staff have been used to when it started out. And then we've also had a really good progress with the police in terms of we can put all these controls in place. If there is an incident, what do we do about it? How are you going to manage that? So we have got incident management plans. Obviously, I can't go into those in any detail. Ongoing work about regulations, which we thought, if you think back to the first slide, foresaw that there was going to be a lot of regulation. I've just been reading about it actually about Grenfell again. So there's been fire safety regulations. We're not covered by the high rise, obviously, but we are covered by a lot of the other smaller ones. Building Safety Act, I'll talk about later on. There's lots of regulations coming out of the Building Safety Act. I've put on there the planks, which we talked about at committee. It seems to have died a little bit down at the moment, but then I didn't see a school in Leicester this week where I think they're having to move pupils out. So it's still there and thereabouts. We're still conducting our reviews of the corporate estate, and we're still feeding into the academies and making sure that they're following their legislative requirements. Radon gas, another one. So this it emanates through the ground, and public health revise their sort of bandwidth of where radon gas could, so that caught back in a number of corporate properties that we had to go out and get testing on that. And then the prevent duty, we have done some work on this year. So this is not led by me, our community safety lead on prevent, but we feed into it. So the property group feeds into it. So if you imagine this is the venue hire, and this is trying to prevent our venues from being let out to organisations that can promote terrorism, extremism, etc. So we've had a lot of work around that in terms of making sure we've got proper policies, proper training, etc. And we've fed into that. So it's been another busy year. Sorry, Joe. Yeah, okay. So where are we going for this year? thinking of our broker is quite impressed. We've got a new broker last year, quite impressed by this group and what it's there for. That doesn't mean to say we can't get better. So I'm going to try and do a little bit of benchmarking against others. Occupant safety, so county also. Yeah, we're planning to have a further site survey. It's been 5 years now since we had the original plans for all of the security measures. And then the incident management I mentioned earlier on, we're going to roll out some training exercises about those. Regulations, this is where I wanted to mention about Building Safety Act. So one of the outcomes from Grenfell was having a principal designer to every sort of design building. And this is where, you know, somebody effectively has to sign their life away to say that the building is going to be secure. So you can imagine that's quite an onerous task to try and find people to do that. And there is a risk of being insufficient supply around, those people around. The prevent duty I mentioned about the venue hire. There is a compliance element behind this. So we will be tested by the government that we are having installed those controls around our venue hire, that we are complying with them. And then the final one is the Terrorism Protection Bill. So this is, you may have heard about this as members, the Protect Duty, and it's all around the Martin's Law, the guy who was killed at the Manchester bombing. So his mum stood forward and pushed through lots of changes around here. So what it does, it mandates, it's now mandatory responsibility that local authorities are in the pot of having to consider terrorist attacks and plan responses. So it's up, you can imagine it's up the ante. So if you imagine, I'm just give a couple of example events, and you know, so if you think Bow Manor has its wedding event, Bow Manor has its motor transport events. We have our Beacon Hill Festival. We're not quite like the city where you've got De Montfort Hall, but we've got other areas sort of thing. But we've got to produce plans around those areas based on the size of the venue. And the words are necessary and proportionate steps to avoid and reduce harm. So that's, you know, and building on the risk assessments we've done in the past. So don't sit still, start planning now. The legislation will turn into an act fairly shortly. Whether I will lead it, I doubt. I think we're looking to push it resilience way, but it will involve members of the property group, which I'm bringing it back to now. So the operational property services in terms of caretaking and, you know, site security, strategic property in terms of building design, health, safety and welfare, and our insurances. So that was a very whistle-stop tour really to the work of the group. Happy to take any questions.
So has anybody got any questions or queries? No, thank you, Neil. Thank you. So there's no queries. So, so first we are to note the presentation provided on property and occupants risk management. Everybody's happy to note that? Yep. Okay. Yeah. Neil, if you go through the rest of the report.
Yes, Chair, thank you. So we're now going to go into the report now. Just bear with me while I get my note. And so this is starting on page 205 of your pack, agenda item 11, and it's the risk management update, so on this occasion, it's a longer paper because it's covering not only the routine updates to the corporate risk register, there's the annual revisions to the policies and information on the property group, which I've just been presenting on. So I'll just go through the cover report, and we can go back to the appendices to enable any questions. So in the cover report itself, paragraphs 6 to 10 explain that for this cycle there has been some movements in the risks. So we've had 3 removed, and then there's one where the description has been slightly amended. The updates for all of those corporate risks are in the routine appendix, which is Appendix 8, and that's pages 211 to 219. Carrying on in the report, though, paragraphs 12 through to 14, just bringing to the committee's attention that I've undertaken annual reviews of the risk management and insurance policies. both of those policies will be included as appendices to the MTFS, which will go to Cabinet and County Council at the budget meeting. So the revised policies then are also included as appendices at B and C. I did notice actually, I think we last year we put some highlights on the changes. If members think that will benefit them, I could recirculate them. There weren't many at all though in the policies this year. The risk management policy, just to inform, when the chief officers took that in advance of this meeting, they agreed the overall risk appetite should remain as open. And that the score for bringing risks through to this committee should remain at 15. Otherwise, if we'd have increased it, we'd have lost quite a few risks coming to the committee. And also an opportunity to start aligning what's in the corporate risk register to strategic plan outcomes. So some changes there. And then the final part of the report itself was just referring back to the detail around the property group, which I'd just been presenting on. So I'm happy to take any questions on anything to do with the report and the appendices.
Thank you, Neil. So has anybody got any questions? Yes, please, Bill.
I noticed on item number 9 on page 206, for assessments, care needs, financial may not be met by existing capacity. It's been reduced. Page 206. Item 9.
Yeah, so the risk itself is that's been on the register is that starting with if, yeah. So that was the risk that's there. What the department has done in its review is to identify that they've managed to clear off a lot of the assessments. They also identified, I think, that they'd probably double counted some from the first place. So the initial risk was probably in there slightly falsely, but they have done a lot of work in putting resources back at clearing these assessments. That makes sense. So sorry, you caught me out a bit there.
I think you said we're looking at the appendices as well, or are you doing that now or later? It was just idle curiosity, really. The first item on the appendix talks about the cost of living crisis. So it says, if the current cost of living crisis continues, what is our definition of cost of living crisis? And therefore, how will we know when it's finished, when it's going down? So did we ever define what we meant by cost of living crisis? And therefore, from a risk register point of view, how will we actually ameliorate that risk based on what evidence?
It's a good question. It's partly because everybody told us we were in a cost of living crisis. So I mean, the truth is, in terms of where we're looking as an indicator, it's probably around inflation and wages. And when we get a better rebalance in there, so it's almost one of those that you can start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But crudely, inflation is probably our guide on this one.
Okay, has anybody got any other questions? Neil, have you finished? You don't want to say anything else on the appendix, do you?
We normally promote a risk for the next meeting,
which is the special educational needs. So we're going to have a presentation on that and the procedures. I mean, that's highlighted in the audit as well, isn't it? Yeah. So everybody agreed that? Yeah. Okay. So regarding recommendation 8, the committee is asked to approve the current status of the strategic risk registers facing the county council. I have to move this recommendation. Can I have a seconder?
Have the second, Chair.
Everybody in favour? Yeah, thank you. We've regarding recommendation B, we've agreed a presentation on special educational needs. With regard to recommendation C, can I take the updates regarding the risk management policy statement and strategy and insurance policy and property and occupants risk management as being duly noted? I'll take that as agreed. Yeah. Okay, so Next item is item 12, external quality assessment of the internal audit service and the revised internal audit charter. So, Neil, over to you again.
Yes, thanks, Chair. So again, this is just a routine paper. Well, actually, it's not routine, is it? So a requirement every 5 years, really, for all public sector internal audit functions to have an independent assessment of their conformance to the what's known as the public sector internal audit standard. So it's our turn now, and we previously attained the top rating. So hoping that we're not going to get down scored. Paragraphs 6 to 8 explain the approach chosen, and that we got that approved by Mr. Barclay and Mr. Bolter. We're commissioning a company called Business Risk Solutions. The lead of that, the independent assessment, will be undertaken remotely by a very experienced internal audit and risk professional. And the cost represents very good value for money. There's considerably more detail in the assessor's proposal, which is included as an appendix, and that starting on page 263, and that does include some references of the value that's added from other references have been value added from other people who've had the assessor. We're already in train. We've already sent some information off to the assessor for the first stage, which is a sort of readiness check. And then he'll come back to us with any sort of areas for questions and clarifications. There's likely to be some questions of the chair and also maybe other members and chief officers. We are expecting a report in March or April, and we'll bring that back to the committee hopefully at its meeting in May. And then the second part of the paper just explains that because of the timing of the quality assessment, we thought it was prudent to review and revise the internal audit charter. That's a key governance document, and what that paragraph 10 and 11 explains the purpose of the charter and how it requires approval by this committee, which is right here today. So the charter's been reviewed. There are minor changes to it, which is made, I've highlighted in the appendix, which starts on page 277. So that's all I've got to say on the report, really. Take any questions.
Thanks very much. So, has anybody got any questions or queries on this report? No. Okay, so moving to recommendation, we ask to note the report to agree the revised internal audit charter, which is set out in Appendix 2. I'm happy to move this recommendation. Can I have a second?
Second, Chair.
Thank you. Is that agreed? Everybody's agreed, right? Thank you. So moving on to the internal audit service progress against the plan for 23-24. Item 13. Neil, over to you again to present.
Thank you, Chair. Just get back to my notes again, sorry. So this is a regular update on the wide range of the work that we undertake, and also the progression of implementing high importance recommendations. We report less often now, so it's covered quite a wide period since I last updated the committee. So paragraphs 4 to 11 summarise the types of work we undertake and the other use of time of the audit services section. And then Appendix 1 in pages 293 to 306 provides all the level of detail. There's also reference in that report to improving the visibility of changes to the original plans. We had quite a lot of impact of reactive work this year, and the plan's been quite volatile. So Simone and I were discussing the other day about how we can make that better. So we'll be looking at a more improved visibility of work that changes in our workflows. And then relating to the references to high importance recommendations, there have been some movements in them this year, in so much that this cycle, in so much we've had one added which went off pretty much immediately, and then we've had a further one closed. So not really many more to be added on in terms of high importance, which is always good. So again, that's all I have to say on the report. Gladly take any questions.
Okay, so Mr. Bolter.
Sorry, somewhere I can't find it now. It says that there's some delay because of some absence, illness.
Paragraph 7.
Paragraph 7.
Yeah.
Has that been rectified, or we're doing something about that, or what?
Paragraph 7.
Yes, found it now. Yeah, I know it was there somewhere. Been a long week.
Yeah, you happy? I'll take it. Yeah. Okay, so sorry, must we? Yeah, we do have a responsibility to report through to committee the work that Nottingham City do on behalf of EMS. So two things come out of this really. In Mark's still here. So in their value for money report, they did pick up transparency that we hadn't brought the opinions to this committee. That's easily sortable because the reports were there, and all we've done is just slot them in this time around. So let's sign that off, and we've got a process now to make sure that we do bring them to committee as and when they go through. The second element was that those reports, when you add them together, a bit like when I bring my head of audit annual report, and that's not been done unfortunately because their head of audit is absent at the moment. So that's still in abeyance. In terms of the actual work itself and the opinions that have come out of the individual audits, there's action plans behind those for the director of EMS or the head of EMS to be able to drive forward the changes and improvements on those. Do you want to add any more in terms of where they are with those? Or
Well, I was just going to add that we do expect the sickness issue that's caused this delay to be resolved very soon.
Oh, right.
I believe that's, isn't it, Neil?
It's an ongoing illness, how long's a piece of string? So, you've answered that now, expected to return to work fairly soon. So that answers that one. Terry.
Funny enough, I was going to ask the same question, I suppose. The bit that slightly worries me is if someone's off sick, there should be contingency rules in place to cover that absence. Most organisations, and clearly they haven't in EMS. And as a shared partner of it, we've done it. Presumably, and the question for the auditor in some ways, because I understand Grant Thornton also audits Nottingham City. Presumably, there should be some collaboration between yourselves and the auditors in Nottingham City, because this is an issue affecting two councils. So do you collaborate on that? Because presumably you're showing it as a very high risk on their audit because they've got somebody off sick and they're not actually covering the position. And then there's a knock-on effect on our risk because we're not getting the information we should do and which we're paying for as part of our being in a shared service. And I would have thought we would have had procedures in place to say to Nottingham, this is not acceptable. The person's been off X amount. You must do something. We want it done by then. So at what point did we say to them, this is unacceptable and we need it sorted?
Simone.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Just to be clear that the sickness issue is actually, it's not with EMS, it's with Nottingham City Council themselves. And we are raising that with them on a regular basis, and we have now escalated that. I guess the difficulty we've got, clearly Nottingham City have got larger issues at the moment, and they do have some substantial vacancies and turnover issues, which I think is exacerbating this, but we are raising it at sort of a senior level as much as we can.
Thank you.
Just to give a bit of assurance, we do see the actual individual audit reports. So it's not that it's a complete black hole. The thing that misses off is you get the head of internal audit to round it off nicely by giving sort of an opinion across the piece. So Neil and his team and Simone as well can see the sort of the detail of sort of any issues that get arisen. So it's not completely bad. It's not great. We don't like it, but it's not as bad as it could be.
Okay. Neil.
Thank you, Chairman. Paragraph 11 of the report, page 289, refers to 53 audits being added as planned to be undertaken into the 6 months to the end of September 23. 21 complete, 16 work in progress. That leaves another 16 which have not been started, and the phrase is they will be reconsidered for the 24-25 planning round. Does the phrase reconsidered mean that they will be added to the 24-25 planning round, or reconsidered in terms of maybe we won't be doing them? I don't know. Can you just clarify that phrase for me, please?
Yeah, before I move on to the reconsidered, this is what I was on about in terms of the introduction to the report. This shows the volatility of the way internal audit works nowadays, in so much that there's so many other priorities that are hitting at the same time that you have to keep on flexing your plan. 20 years ago, I'd have just had a plan and we'd have ticked the audits off, and that was the way. That doesn't happen anymore. It doesn't happen in life anymore. For auditors, you're constantly having to react to what management sees as a higher priority. So in terms of the word that you used, I can't remember what it is in there, reconsidered. So reconsiders is in terms of priority. So we're going to go through a more formalised planning process, and then we're going to keep that, improve the visibility over that. So in terms of those audits there, if they do, when we go through that reconsideration, if they do not make it, we'll be given a reason why they don't make it and keeping that visible. And it's likely to be that it's been overtaken by either something's changed, and it doesn't have to be that it's always a priority. Sometimes people have ideas and there are projects that start off and then they never come to fruition. So that could be a reason, or it could be lower down the priority scale.
Okay, so thank you. So that's all the questions that are going to be asked. So the committee's asked to note the report. Is that agreed? Yeah, thank you. So next item is item 14, Treasury Management Strategy 2024-25. Nick, over to you to present this item, please.
Thank you, Chair. This report presents the updated Treasury Management Strategy Statement, which forms part of the overall MTFS. It's basically a framework under which all our Treasury management activity will be undertaken in the next financial year. The statement is attached as an appendix to the report, and it includes the policy around things like minimum revenue provision and the sort of prudential indicators. There aren't really any significant changes that have been made to the strategy from the 2023-24 version. So what happens next is the statement will be considered by full council as part of the MTFS at its meeting on the 21st of February. So the statement itself has got quite a lot of detail in it. So I'm not going to go through all of that, but just in terms of summarising what is included. It begins on page 13 of your pack and initially provides a sort of background to the wider economic climate in which we kind of currently operating, which we expect to be operating as we move into the next financial year. The Treasury Management Strategy itself, which starts on page 319, sets out key things around sort of the key considerations, reporting and training requirements, details of the Council's Treasury Management Advisors and the consultants, what we expect to see as the capital financing requirement, our expectations on the minimum revenue provision, the prudential and treasury indicators, and the approach to any borrowing that may be required to be undertaken. And then also in terms of the annual investment strategy, which starts on page 328 in the pack, that sets out our investment policy and our management of risk, creditworthiness policy, various limits that we will apply in terms of counterparties and also with respect to specific countries, details of pooled property and infrastructure fund investments, environment, social and governance considerations, scheme and delegation and the role of the Section 151 officer. And then just to sort of complete in terms of what the report covers, there's also in terms of some annexes, there's the Annex 1, which is the minimum revenue provision statement. Annex 2, the prudential and treasury indicators used to assess treasury management activity over the year. 3 is the policy on approved organisations for lending. And then Annex 4 is the treasury management policy statement. So that was all I was going to say, but obviously if there's any questions on any particular aspect of the report.
Nick, has anybody got any questions or queries on this report? No? Yeah, we'll just hang on for a second while searches.
I can't find. You can never find a paragraph when you're looking for it, can you? But there's a paragraph in here that says that on an annual basis we have to look at all of our investments and determine whether they should be sold. whether they may be outside the terms of what you can now invest in going forward. What process does that take, and who does it presume it goes to the assets team, does it, so that that revaluation goes there? So how do we know that that has taken place as the people approving the policy?
So I guess it'll all be picked up as part of the Investing in Leicestershire programme, which obviously covers those sort of assets where we kind of need to reevaluate to make sure that we're still holding them in connection to what is actually appropriate, rather than dropping out because we're only holding them for investment purposes and things like that, where we might then have to kind of, sell them because we can no longer tick in the boxes are required around economic development, etc.
I was thinking more, what's the procedure? I'm sorry. I was thinking, what's the procedure and who does it go to and who monitors that we've done it on an annual basis? I was just thinking, what is the governance procedure for doing that review, and who then looks at the results of the review?
I'll put it on. Sorry, keep pressing it. Which will go to full council, and it's one of the appendices within the MTFS. So it goes to cabinet initially, and then it will go onto full council as one of the appendices in there.
Thank you, Nick. Any more questions or queries? No. So committee's asked to note the report. Are we happy to do that? Yep. Thank you. So the final substantive item on today's agenda is the quarterly Treasury Management report. Nick, again, over to you to present that, please.
Still on. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So this report summarises the position at the end of the third quarter of the 23-24 financial year. Just kind of going through the different elements of it. Paragraphs 2 to 8 just kind of outline, as usual, what Treasury Management is and the committee's responsibilities with respect to it. Paragraphs 9 to 12 pick up the key points from Link's latest economic summary, and obviously it's attached in detail as Appendix A. But so just a couple of key points. Domestic inflation obviously continues to ease, as we know, with CPI falling during the quarter, and it was down to 3.9% at the end of November. GDP figures sort of remain sort of subdued, and there was a result. It was a 0.3% fall in October. So we still remains to be seen whether or not we kind of going to fall into recession or not through the end of the last financial year, because we need to wait and see the final month's results. But it's going to be a bit touch and go, I think. Section starting on paragraph 13, that covers the position with respect to our private debt and bank risk share funds. So in terms of the 2017 Partners MAC 4 fund, a further £0.8 million of capital was returned during that period. 5.5 million remains invested from the original 20 million, and that 5.5 million is currently valued at 6.3 million. And in respect to the MAC 4 fund, a further 0.2 million capital was returned, leaving 18.3 million invested, and that's got a current value of 20.3 million. There were no distributions received from either the Christopherson Robb investments during the period or from the MAC 7, which is actually really only just we've only just made our first payment over to them. We've only had our first call from the fund, and that totaled to 2.4 million during the period. In terms of short-term investments, paragraph 18 onwards, that shows that there's a balance on the short-term investments, and it fell from £383 million at the end of the previous quarter to £371 million. Various reasons, primarily a combination of no precept schedule for receipt in December, and coupled with the cash flow impact of paying out the backdated pay award. Obviously, that all went out as a large lump sum at the end of December. During the period, 93 million of loans matured. That was with an average APR at 5.14%, and 80.8 million of new loans were taken out, an average of 5.58%. So we're obviously still in a position where our new loans are still generating a higher APR than the ones that are maturing. The weighted average maturity has reduced from 165 days to 168 days to 145. And it's probably worth noting, so that replacement margin on new loans, i.e. the amount by which the interest rate on new loans exceeds the interest rate on loans maturing, that's fallen to 0.44%, which is almost a percent less than it was at the end of the previous quarter. And that reflects the fact that the market's now expecting that the base rate as it peaked at 5.25% will begin to fall during the latter half of 2014. Paragraph 23, the table there shows the investments that are outstanding at the end of the period. And then there's further information included in the diagrams. Paragraph 24 show how the funding is split across institutions geographically, and note that we're currently at full exposure with Canadian and German banks, and also by sovereign and institutional credit rating. And the majority of funds in both cases continue to be held within the three highest credit rating categories. Moving on to paragraph 26, that shows that the weighted APR on the investment portfolio has increased 5.39% up to 5.53% at the end of the quarter. And obviously that increase continues to align with the Bank of England base rate, and has more recently actually pushed above it if you look at the little graph. Sorry, the little graph that's in paragraph 26. Paragraphs 27 to 29 confirm that during the quarter, no retrospective breaches of the authorised counterparty list, no further debt rescheduling, and the council has operated within Treasury and prudential indicators. And then finally, paragraph 13 advises that the interest received on balances could reach as high as 20 million by the end of this financial year against a budget of 13.6 million, which is unchanged from the previous estimate at the end of the last quarter. I was going to say thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nick. So has anybody else got any more questions? No questions. Oh, Terry.
It was only a quick one really on Appendix A. I always get quite confused by Appendix A because it sort of throws out lots of figures, but then it's not consistent. So the very first paragraph on there, it says the third quarter of saw a 0.3% decline in real GDP in October. But then we don't mention November or December, whereas we do in the others. Now we know that GDP went up by 0.3% in November. So if we're going to have a report that for some figures it quotes November and December, and for others, why does it only quote October for some and 3 months for all of them? Should there not be consistency across it? Because anyone reading this will think, well, hold on, we're at the end of January. We know what the figure was in November for GDP. We've probably got December's by now. I can't remember if we have or not, but certainly November's is out as a 0.3% increase. It just strikes me that consistency of figures in that might be useful to members of the public reading the report if it's possible to attain it. It might not be.
Okay. Well, I think generally speaking, what we tend to do is we attach the link economic overview that relates to what they issue at the end of the period, at the end of the month, which is the same as the end of the period. So in theory, you're right. There probably is maybe sometimes another month's worth of overview that they've produced, which would then perhaps provide more updated information covering some of the last months of the quarter. But it's kind of the way we've done it. But we could look to try and always issue the most recent one rather than the one that kind of lines up with the end of the period, if that would make a difference. It would be helpful.
I mean, that would be very kind because, I mean, October's the start of the period, isn't it? I mean, December's the end of the period. But, I mean, you know, as I said, we know what the GDP figure was for November, and it just strikes me as illogical it's not in there. But
yeah, well, I think it's in part because there's a delay before the figures are published, aren't they? So they're not always available. But at the end of December, the document, the link provided, the last information they had at the time was with respect to October.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Walter.
Thanks, Chair. Item 23, I couldn't say what page is. It says that you made £100,000 short-term cash flow loan to ESPO. How short was the loan? How short was the time? And need we worry about ESPO if they can't balance the books? Cash flow loan worries me that, you know, there may be a problem with ESPO.
It was not. We managed the bank accounts on behalf of ESPO. So what happened was the loan was basically over a period of a couple of days, and it was just because they basically ran short. And the easiest way is just for us to kind of do a temporary loan to them from our own funds, rather than them kind of going into overdraft, and then obviously just they recompense us the next couple of days. So we just did right over the end of the period, very short term.
Okay, so any other questions? No. So we are asked to, the committee asked to note that the report. Is that agreed? Yeah, okay. So the date of the next meeting of the Corporate Governance Committee is scheduled for the 24th of May 2023. However, can I please make members aware that an additional meeting will be need to be arranged in order for us to consider the final external audit of the accounts. Officers will be in touch to arrange this as soon as they are able. Item 17, are there any items which the Chairman has decided to take as urgent? As I said before, there are no other items. Before I close the meeting, can I remind members to please stay for the short discussion with Neil regarding the self-assessment questionnaire circulated by Joe earlier this week, which is going to deal with which we're going to deal with now after the meeting is closed. This should not take long. So thank you all for your attended meeting today. Thank you, Mark, for coming along, and all the officers for presenting. I now declare the meeting closed, and if we can just stay for a few minutes, we'll get Neil to do his presentation.